He can't end the war. And what's kind of interesting is that it seems like we're almost at the point where the United States is just going to walk away from everything and just say, you know what, this isn't my problem anymore. And that way we can kind of go and worry about China. It's probably not the best strategy, but it certainly is a strategy. And in a case like that, it means that Europe is being left to its own devices. So I think Russia doesn't want a ceasefire. What they want is the kind of chaos that looking for a ceasefire might bring, because that can kind of bring some tactical benefits on the battlefield, or perhaps some political wins with people saying, look, Russia doesn't want a ceasefire. Oh, look, Russia does want a ceasefire. Look at Ukraine. Look at how horrible they are by continuing to fight. But I think one of the issues is that, right now in domestic politics inside the United States, there are a lot of stories right now. Stories about people being deported, stories about the Secretary of Defense using technology inappropriately, stories about a fight between the president and Jerome Powell, who's the chairman of our Federal Reserve Bank. And Chairman Powell doesn't want to decrease interest rates, which is something the president wants done. So all of those domestic stories are kind of taking the air out of the room. There's only so much room on a news feed or in a news show to show the stories of the world. So I think what Russia might be scared about here is that they kind of missed their opportunity. They kind of missed their window, because there's so much stuff going on domestically in the United States that nobody's really paying attention to the war in Ukraine anymore, at least in the United States, which is a bad thing. Russia needs someone to pay attention to it for its propaganda to work. So in a case like this, it might actually be bad news for Russia, because if nobody's listening to you, what's the purpose of propaganda?
And do you believe that this was a propaganda failure by Vladimir Putin? As you just mentioned, nobody just even noticed this big development, so-called big development from Vladimir Putin.
I don't think it's a failure. I suppose it's a failure in the big scheme of things, but it's certainly not something that they could anticipate. That outside circumstances would change things to the point that people were not paying attention anymore. It almost happened after October 7th in Israel, when Israel kind of took a lot of the air out of the room, because so many people were talking about Israel. But, if nobody's listening to you, what's the point of spreading propaganda? It's very difficult to earn propaganda wins if everything on the news is what the president said today. And I don't think that was in Russia's calculus.
But don't you think that Vladimir Putin really badly needs this ceasefire just to regroup his troops and to have some rest for another attacks on Ukraine? This is really popular opinion among many people and analysts. I actually don't think that. I don't think that while giving them a day of rest might be a tactical consideration, I don't particularly think they care to do that, because, all right, you might be able to rotate troops off the line, give them a month's worth of rest and retraining, but I do not believe Russia really has the troops to actually give people rotations. So 30 days on the line, 30 days away from the front lines. Because if they had those troops, they would probably be doing that, right? And so since they don't have those troops and they're not doing that, it kind of makes sense that people are plugged into existing units in ones and twos. As people die, new people come in, they're plugged in. So it'd be great if they could rotate people, but that would mean you'd need an army that's currently twice the size of the soldiers that are in Ukraine right now, or that are occupying Ukraine right now. And that's just not doable for Russia, at least right now. So I don't really see Russia using a ceasefire to rearm and regroup. I don't really see it as that useful.
because while it would be nice for people to rest, I don't really believe they have the troops to start any kind of rotation where they can get people to rest.
So even if there is, for example, big 30-day ceasefire, Russia will not be able to rotate troops and to rotate ammunition, also weaponry and troops from Russia to Ukraine and from Ukraine to Russia.
Yeah, I think that would be very difficult. I think both sides would have a very hard time performing any kind of refit. Ukraine, it's kind of interesting. They have the troops, right? They have people who are motivated. It's very difficult to go back to the well, right? Like the well is getting lower. At least the pool of volunteers is getting lower. Whereas Russia, the issue with Russia is that the pool of volunteers is kind of holding steady, but now you're competing with the civilian sector, right? So you have people who are making these weapon systems who are working in factories, and in Russia's case, they have to outbid the people that are making them the weapons. So if you're paid, let's say, I'm pulling this out of the air here, 50 rubles an hour as a factory worker making weapons. Well, that means you need to pay at least 50 rubles an hour as a soldier, right? Probably more, because being a soldier is more dangerous. So then people join the army because that's where the money is. So then the civilian sectors raise the amount of money that they're paying to work there. So the army has to raise their money. So that's actually Ukraine. That's Russia's biggest problem. It's this runaway inflation where you have too few people chasing high wages, and Ukraine doesn't necessarily have that problem.
And also, so you don't believe that Russia really needs a ceasefire right now?
No, I mean, it wouldn't hurt to have a ceasefire and have your men rest, but I don't believe they need it in order to stay successful or in order to keep the pressure on Ukraine.
And also, what, from your perspective, what is Vladimir Putin trying to achieve in these negotiations right now? Because he does participate in this process. His people participate. People are meeting American colleagues in different locations around the globe. Discussions are going on right now. What are they doing? What is their objective right now in these negotiations?
I believe their objective in the negotiations is to keep the negotiations going on as long as possible. Because as long as the negotiations are going on, you can send out propaganda saying, look, we're negotiating, but this group is choosing not to engage with us, right? I think that's kind of the goal of the negotiations. It's to create the opportunity to create propaganda. And at the end of the day, what you kind of have here is once a ceasefire happens, then there's really no more room to negotiate a ceasefire, right? So that's kind of an issue. So while it might seem counterintuitive that you don't want a ceasefire, even though a ceasefire would be helpful, this is one of those things that's Russia in a nutshell, right? Russia always seems to be a little counterintuitive to what you'd expect.
And also, you're confident, according to our latest interview, that Russia will suddenly collapse. Do you feel that a ceasefire could bring the collapse of Russia closer or even more far away? How could this influence Russia's ability to exist as a state, as a united state?
Russia could certainly collapse. That is a possibility. I don't think a ceasefire would cause a collapse, but I certainly think that if certain circumstances aren't met, especially if, one of the things President Trump had talked about was secondary sanctions, where the United States sanctions countries that are purchasing Russian oil. If you get to the point where nobody wants to buy Russian oil, it becomes very, very difficult to pay soldiers.
And once that happens, look, soldiers are going to be loyal to a point, right? They're going to be loyal to the point that once they stop getting paid, that's a problem. And if it turns out they stop getting paid, kind of the next thing that happens is they start looking for ways to make money. And that's how soldiers become a mob, right? Now, the good thing about Ukraine is that Ukraine can get some funding from Europe in order to pay their soldiers' salaries. So they're not really an issue. But once you start seeing soldiers who don't get paid, they turn into mercenaries. And once they turn into mercenaries, now you have a mob. And that isn't good.
And it was one time in the history, Prigozhin march on Moscow. Russia's mercenaries led by Yevgeny Prigozhin, he was killed by probably Vladimir Putin, but they tried to capture Moscow to decapitate Vladimir Putin's regime. And so you're talking about this threat to the Russian regime, and that's why Kremlin is really afraid of mercenaries.
Yeah. I mean, look, every soldier is what, 2-3 meals away from becoming a mercenary, right? I mean, you think about it, they're 2-3 paychecks away from becoming a mercenary. So that's kind of something to think about. If Russia runs out of money to fund the war, it's not going to turn out good for Russia.
There could be even chaos inside Russia and inside Vladimir Putin's inner circle regarding what we are going to do with this war and unpaid soldiers.
Yeah, that could certainly be an issue. Where, look, soldiers expect to get paid. And soldiers expect to have certain kinds of benefits, veterans benefits and so on. And when that goes away, you have young men who are physically fit, who are trained to use firearms. Granted, Russia's firearm laws are not as liberal as the laws of the United States, but that's never stopped young men with ideas from getting guns.
And also, let's cover recent developments on the ground. Russia has conducted another assault in the south of Ukraine. However, Russia failed to achieve any kind of success. Ukrainian army repelled this attack, and Russia faced unsustainable losses again. Do you feel that Russia is trying to achieve something that is unachievable? It's impossible to achieve something like that, to also capture even more Ukrainian land on the other side of Dnipro River, all the land Vladimir Putin claims is the Russian one.
Well, I'm sure they'd certainly like to, right? Like that is the ultimate goal. They'd certainly like to take that land. The question is whether it's actually feasible to do so. And, war is hard. And amphibious invasions are pretty darn hard, too. Or river crossings are pretty darn hard, too. And, I got to tell you, you can train for something as much as you like, but Murphy's Law, I don't know if that translates well into Ukrainian. The law of the whatever can go wrong will go wrong. That always seems to rear its head whenever there's any kind of military operation. And one of the huge issues with Russia is that they just don't have the non-commissioned officers, the sergeants, who can make calls on the ground and respond to changing situations.
And also, you just mentioned about the military operation. United Kingdom, France, and other European allies are preparing this big plan to deploy troops to Ukraine as a part of the coalition of willing. After ceasefire, what is your assessment of this idea from a military point of view? Is this feasible for European allies without American backstop?
Well, I mean, yes. France and Great Britain are two of the countries that could actually provide peacekeepers, mainly because they have the logistical tail to support them. I don't know how long they would be able to do it financially, or what that would look like, specifically with having their troops rotate in and out. I think France can field 3 divisions. The UK can field 2 if they activate their reserves. So there might not be physically enough troops. They might only be able to send 1 or 2 brigades each. And so now we're talking maybe 1,200 troops. That isn't a lot to cover an entire border. When you consider, Ukraine tends to have 1 brigade on the border every, I believe it's 20 miles or so. What that translates into kilometers is 25, maybe 20, yeah, I guess 26 or so, 28, I think, 28 kilometers roughly. They have a brigade. So that's the idea of fielding 3 brigades across the entire Ukrainian front. That's just, the front is just so massive. It's very difficult to do something like this without the actual physical troops. And I don't really know how Great Britain or the UK can square that circle, at least not without using troops from third-party countries, maybe non-aligned countries like Brazil or Indonesia or Saudi Arabia.
And also another big idea to enforce air policing zone over Ukraine, to close Ukrainian skies after ceasefire, even at least over the west of Ukraine and central part of Ukraine. Would it be also feasible for UK and France to do so without American Air Force?
Yes and no. So America has a lot of the airborne warning control planes. There are shared NATO planes as well, shared NATO AWACS. They call them E-3 Sentries. I believe Great Britain and France have their own radar planes, which you would need in order to enforce a no-fly zone. However, I don't know if their software is American-made or American-owned. And that's where things get tricky, because if America says, no, I don't want you to do this, and they use American software in order to perform their air traffic control, that can be an issue, right? That can be an issue. So I believe they have the physical capacity to do so, but anything like kind of beyond what you might see with just the physical ability to move troops, that's kind of the question mark. It's the actual deals that they would have to make in order to get something like this done. That's kind of up in the air.
And also, if there is a green light from the US to conduct such mission, in your opinion, it could be possible for European allies?
I think so. I think it could be possible. Absolutely. They have the equipment. It's just I don't know whether some of that equipment has American roots, and so America would say, hey, you can't use this because you're using our tech and whatever, right? Like people, things are really weird right now here. I wish I had better news for you. But things have gotten kind of weird. And I don't know where our president stands from one day to the next.
You just mentioned about President Trump. Recently he said that the ceasefire deal could be reached as soon as even this week. How can you assess the possibility of ceasefire deal broken this week, reached this week?
Well, I think he's just saying words. Nothing's going to happen this week. It's just not. There's too much going on right now, and there's only so many hours in a day, and the president really doesn't have time to deal with absolutely everything. So there's really not a lot. I think that can be accomplished with Ukraine this week.
And also there is interesting opinion. So if Donald Trump abandons Ukraine, this would not be good news for Russian dictator Putin, because if there is if U.S. abandons Ukraine, Europe will take a lead in this process of supporting Ukraine. What is your opinion on that?
And I didn't really believe this a couple of weeks ago, but now I'm starting to come to the conclusion that the United States abandoning Ukraine could probably be the worst possible thing for Russia. Right?
Really?
Right now, we've dangled weapons in front of Ukraine saying, do what we say or else you don't get these weapons, do what we say or else you don't get this satellite imagery. But kind of the issue here is that if Ukraine doesn't take the bait and respond to America's threats, then then America's threats are useless, right? And if America is trying to keep Russia in line by either funding Ukraine or defunding Ukraine, they're trying to kind of control Russia's movements with what's going on in Ukraine, then if America just takes itself out of the picture, well, now Russia has to maybe negotiate with Ukraine directly or with Europe directly. And Europe has a different view of Putin than America, right? America has these two big, beautiful oceans on either side. We're not very scared of Russia. But Europe, I've been to Europe. People are scared. And when you have something like that right next to your border, you tend to be a lot tougher than a country with two oceans, right? So, America leaving Europe to take care of this could actually be the worst thing possible for Russia.
It's really interesting that also the new German Chancellor Friedrich Merz, he supports providing Ukraine with German-made Taurus cruise missile. What is your opinion, assessment of this weaponry, of this missile, and how could they influence the situation on the ground if such missiles are being provided to Ukraine by Germany?
It's just another tool in the toolkit, right? It's not necessarily the weapon system. It's the biggest breakthrough is Germany providing offensive weapons, right? That's kind of the big deal here. It's that Germany would say, you know what, we're going to provide offensive weapons. It's not necessarily the type of weapon that's the big deal. It's the fact that they're doing offensive weapons at all that you should kind of go, all right, yeah, that's pretty interesting. So, yeah, that's the notion that the type of cruise missile, that's not very important. It's the fact that Germany has decided to send offensive weapons that's kind of the breakthrough here.
And you're confident that if the US abandons Ukraine, this could be the worst case scenario for Putin, and this would be more difficult for Russia to conduct negotiations with Europe, European allies, with Ukraine without American involvement.
Yeah, I mean, it certainly could be a bad outcome for Russia and maybe a better outcome for Ukraine. It's almost like you're, I guess the best way to put it is it's almost like the United States is a boyfriend who just keeps telling you that you're worthless. Oh, you'll be nothing without us. You can't leave me because you're going to be nothing unless you have me around. And what Ukraine probably needs to do is break up and start talking to that nice boy in the European Union who has given them weapons and so on.
It's really interesting because some analysts believe that this is the reason why Putin declared one-day ceasefire to stay in this game of negotiations to prove Trump that he can do something, that he would like to have a peace. Do you also think so, that Putin did that just to stay in this game of negotiations?
That's certainly possible. Look, because he's competing against all the other scandals that are going on inside the United States. And there's only so much bandwidth. There's only so much air, right? So, yeah, you could be absolutely right.
Thank you, Ryan, for our discussions, for your time and for your support for Ukraine, and glory to Ukraine.